All right, everyone. And thank you. Thank you for being here. You know, I love I love reading and I love Joseph Campbell. He's one of my favorite authors. And Campbell had the ability to look across the mythologies of the world. The myths, in Campbell's view, the myths are not fairy tales or fabrication, but rather the myths are the metaphor. They're a story that can that can hold a value for us and can illustrate something for us that is too abstract for the mind to grasp. Campbell tells us that that in the ancient times the heavens were filled with all sorts of gods. There's a god for fire and a god for rain and a god for crops and a god for animals, for livestock and all of those things. And when Moses came along, this idea of one God came with him, and it was not an original idea to him. It was an idea that was in fact taught in Egypt, where he was supposedly uh, stationed there for some time. But he certainly popularized the idea. And with this idea of the fact that there's only one God, there's not a God for this and a God for that and a God for the other thing. There's only one God. He swept the heavens clean of all of these other gods. And what Campbell tells us is since that very day, humanity has been busy repopulating the heavens. We put up there all kinds of angels and saints and saviors and intermediaries and something that can go and interface with the divine on our behalf, something that can do something tangible for us. I remember as a child, we always had some type of a religious icon around our neck, some type of a medal that was in one way, shape, or form designed to bring us protection, to perhaps create the spiritual awareness that would bring us protection, but in the mind of a small child, it was sort of a magical amulet, talisman. If we wore this, we would be protected. Of course, we believe that. If we wore that, we would be protected. So the point is that we as human beings, we have a very difficult time dealing with the abstract. You know, probably a perfect example is if you look at the images from the Hubble telescope on the website, which fascinate me, and you look at how large the universe is, that part of the universe that the Hubble can see. Right? I mean, it can't see all that's out there. It's limited. And we look at that and we try to somehow grasp the enormity of God's creation of the universe. And we can't. We can't. It is beyond our intellectual capacity to grasp. And you even hear in the media, in the news reports and in the articles, the people really don't get what they're talking about because they're talking about that pretty soon we're going to be able to see to the end of the universe. Well, what do they think there's going to be at the end of the universe? A wall, a big sign, the universe ends here. See, this concept of infinity, is beyond the human mind to grasp. So what we do in terms of our values, in terms of the things that are really important to us, we adopt icons, we adopt symbols in our life, we adopt something that seems tangible to us that we can wrap our mind around, something that perhaps we can touch and we can feel. And it holds that meaning for us. It holds some type of a sacred meaning for us. And yet it is real. It is, you can touch it, you can feel it. I remember many years ago, Lori and I had an opportunity to take some classes with a Hindu philosopher. There's a Hindu temple in Morrisville, North Carolina, right by the Raleigh-Durham Airport, and there's a large community of people from India who work as engineers in the Research Triangle Park. And some of my friends went to the temple and they invited me to come and take these classes with them. And when we went in, of course, it was a very new experience. I had never been in such a place before in my life. And there were many different statues along the wall of many different gods or deities. And of course, they're very odd looking to our culture. We don't understand the symbolism of having multiple sets of arms and eyes and elephants' heads on human bodies and all these kinds of things. You know, we would look at that and say, isn't this strange? But as I started studying a little bit about the ideas, you know, the teachers, the people who are probably more advanced in their thinking than somebody who's just beginning, they understand that this is only a statue made of plaster, that is not the God, that it's only a statue made of plaster. But if someone needs to believe that plaster is the God, if that's going to help them in their spiritual growth to get started, that's okay. And at some point, the student comes to recognize then that, well, the plaster isn't the God, but represents the God. It's an icon or a symbol of the God. And then eventually the student begins to learn that, well, what I'm calling the God by this particular name, you know, is not really a separate entity from the one, from the all, but it's just kind of a group of characteristics of the all, kind of a small piece of the intangible whole that I can kind of get my mind around. See? So the understanding, when I started to study it, the understanding seemed to make a great deal of sense. It was very kind in that if you try to bring somebody directly from no knowledge whatsoever to this abstract, that which is without beginning and without end and always was and always shall be and expresses itself as omniscience, as omnipotence, as omnipresence, you know, the mind can't grasp that. So we move to it in stages. We move to it in stages. Now, I only mention all of this as way of kind of bringing us to the idea that the oldest religious icons found on earth so far, they may find some older, but the oldest religious icons that have been found are these little they're carved from stone, but they're these little carved statues of a pregnant woman. The oldest religious symbol that we have on earth is a pregnant woman. And I think that says a whole lot about what we want to talk about today, which is the sacredness of motherhood, of what motherhood is. Now, I recognize, excuse me, that for some of us this is a difficult day, a difficult time, because we remember our moms who are no longer with us, they're gone, and we're sad because they're not with us. We may remember a childhood that was not, you know, a television sitcom childhood that we did not have Ozzie and Harriet for our mom and dad, and we feel that we were mistreated and missed out on our childhood. And that brings up painful memories. And we have to remember for the moms who have left us, you know, that they're not gone forever, that they've moved to a different experience. And we'll talk about that some more next week when we celebrate our loved ones. And if we've missed out on love, if we didn't know our mother, or if our mother couldn't give us the love that we deserved as a child, or we feel we deserved as a child, please remember that the motherhood that we're talking about is an icon, is a symbol of God's unconditional love for us. It is, it is, it is that love made manifest in our lives in a very tangible form. And that's the love that we're looking for. That's the love that we're seeking. See, and that love can be had. That love can be had still to this day, no matter what our circumstances, where we can make our contact with the divine, we can experience the divine love. So if there's any sadness, I understand that. I understand that, and I don't wish to make anybody sad. But if there's sadness there, there's also an opportunity to grieve it and to grow and to find that which you're truly seeking. Because we're never going to get that which we didn't have. We can't go back and reclaim it. But we can experience it. We can experience it in a different way. So this oldest icon, this oldest religious icon that we have in the human experience is a symbol of motherhood, this pregnant woman. Because the earliest people, as well as the people alive today, the earliest people, they recognize that there's something miraculous, there's something wonderful, there's something special about this thing that we call motherhood. And even if you look on to the more modern religions, if you look to the symbol of the Madonna and Child, in Christianity, when I grew up in a Christian tradition, in Christianity we had the symbol of Mary with the baby Jesus on his knee. And that was the Madonna and Child, and it was a religious icon. It was something that we would gaze upon and something that we would meditate upon. But if you look before Christianity, if you look in other cultures, if you look in Egypt, for example, you have Isis and Horus in the same pose of the child sitting on the mother's lap. So this idea of the sacredness of motherhood keeps emerging and keeps coming to us. And we have to look at that and understand, what is it about that? See, what is it about that is drawing us to God through that symbolism, through that icon? And if we stop and think, the first thing that I think occurs to me when we think about motherhood is it is right before our eyes. It is the miracle of life recreating itself. The desire of life to live, the desire of life to do whatever needs to be done in order to continue living, and the intelligence and the wisdom of life to know exactly what to do. Frederick Bales does a beautiful job of describing this in his book, Your Mind Can Heal You. If you think about what takes place inside a mother's body as that little child is growing, it is just amazing that we can have two tiny cells, a sperm and an egg, come together and form one. They split in half and form one. And then they divide again, and we get 2, and then 4, and then 8, and then 16, and then 32, and so on. And there's an invisible wisdom that is guiding that growth, that knows exactly what to do. And some of those cells will become hard bone, and some will become soft tissue, and some will be dense and you can't see through them, and some will become eyes and you can see right through them. Light can get in. And this whole time that this is going on, the two are connected, the mother and the child. And what the mother eats, the child eats through the umbilical. And the child doesn't even breathe on its own. It receives the oxygen that it needs through the umbilical. And this frees the lungs up to breathe in and out the fluid, the amniotic fluid, which strengthens the lungs so that they'll be ready to do what they need to do when they come into the world. And in the process of coming down the birth canal, the baby's body is compressed in such a way that all of that fluid expels from the lungs. And as the child's head emerges into the world for the first time, the air that was prepared for it millions of years ago is sucked into its lungs. So in that idea of motherhood is the miracle of life itself. In that we can see the very love of God preparing for each of us everything that was appropriate for us, everything that we needed before we were born was here: the food, the water, the air. The wisdom to grow that little body. The wisdom to have the birth process expel the fluid from the lungs so it could breathe. There's something absolutely, positively miraculous that when we contemplate motherhood, it takes us beyond the simple fact that's right before us that, well, a baby was born, it's been going on for a long time. And we can get complacent about it. We can think it's ordinary. But there's something about that moment, You ever see the people in the hospital when they, excuse me, when they see the little one for the first time, they say, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. And it is a miracle, right? It is a miracle. It is divine activity visible right before our eyes through the function of motherhood. So when we think about motherhood in that regard, we can now understand, and excuse me, I'm going to take a drink of water here. We can understand why our ancient ancestors could carve little statues of pregnant women to use as religious icons. Because just simply meditating and contemplating and thinking about what in the world is going on here leads us back to the divine. The fact that the divine is with us and has never left us. The fact that the divine has prepared for us that which we will need. The fact that the divine always knows what to do and when to do it and how to do it in our lives, if we will let it. And of course, when we were growing in our mother's wombs, we had no choice but to let it. Now that we're older and our freedom of will has kicked in, we must accept it. It cannot force itself upon us. But everything that we need has been provided. Everything that needs to be known is within us. And the divine is ready, willing, and able to continue to do that which seems to be miraculous to us and is ordinary to itself, because it is simply itself expressing its own life by a process that it created through each and every one of us. So I think that's the first thing about motherhood that comes to mind, is when we think about it, is it can't help but taking us back. Motherhood and the birth of a child is a very tangible, real experience that has a much, much deeper spiritual significance if we will simply open ourselves up to that, to contemplate it. Then the next thing that happens is, if we think about it, when we come into the world, we are not able to care for ourselves. We need someone to feed us. And again, the miracle is there from the very moment that the child is born. It knows how to suckle. When I was training as a paramedic, that was one of the things they taught us if we had to do childbirth in a home or in our ambulance. Is immediately clean up the baby and give it to the mother to nurse, because it helps her pass the placenta. But that child knows from the moment it's born, it knows where its good is, and it knows how to accept it. It knows how to receive it. And our mother knows how to care for us, how to clean us, how to wrap us in swaddling clothes, how to change our diapers, how to teach us to talk, how to teach us to sing, how to teach us to love, to teach us to take our first steps, maybe to ride a bike. All of the things that we need to know as we're growing up, they are there to take care of us. And if we think about that, if we think about the representation of that and the spiritual significance of that, it brings me back to something Dr. Bales has said. He says the intelligence that was operating in the womb, that created our tiny bodies from 2 cells, that knew exactly what to do every step of the way, it didn't leave us when we were born. It didn't abandon us when we were born. It didn't cast us out into this cold, cruel world and say, okay, good luck. But it is with us every moment of every day. Who amongst us, in the New Testament it says, who amongst us by taking thought can grow an inch, you know? Who knows how to make their heart beat? Who knows how to tell our lungs how to do their work? Who knows how to tell our kidneys what to do? Intellectually, we don't know how to do that. We can't do it. Scientists can study it and they can figure it out, but we don't know how to do it. You and I can't sit here and say, okay, lungs, do your work. They do it because they are guided by an invisible hand, an unseen intelligence, the knower within that knows what to do. So if we think of the symbolism of our mothers caring for us as children, every need is anticipated, lovingly cared for. Again, we can move back beyond the tangible, beyond the symbol that's right there in front of us, beyond the icon, and recognize that this too is a representation of divine love in our lives, an expression of God's love, of God's unconditional love for us. And that the divine too is still with us, nearer than our breath, closer than our hands and feet, but we must be still. We must take time to open ourselves up for the divine contact. It's got to be something that we do deliberately and consciously, that we court deliberately and consciously, that we invite deliberately and consciously into our lives. And the other thing that I think about motherhood is that you moms don't quit. Moms don't quit on you. No matter what kind of mess you get yourself into, moms don't quit on you. You are always their child, and they will never give up. I'll give you just a couple of examples. The town I grew up in, one of my parents' friends had an adult son. I guess he was probably in his 40s, and he got convicted of a crime. He did the crime, and he got convicted of it, and he was sent up to Sing Sing. For those of you in New York who like old movies, you know where Sing Sing is, just up the Hudson River, where the expression going up the river got its start. And he was sent there for a long time. I don't know how long it was going to be, but it was so long that he was not going to be eligible for a parole hearing for 15 years. And or maybe an appeal. I'm not certain what it was, but it was some type of a legal proceeding that he had to wait 15 years before he could file. And in order to do that, he needed the transcript of his trial. And in those days, the transcripts were $1 a page. I don't know what they are now. So it was tens of thousands of dollars that he was going to need for this transcript. And his mother realized that she was in her 60s, and she might not be around by the time this 15 years was up, and if she was, she certainly wouldn't have the money the ability to go to work to get the money. So what she did was she mortgaged the house. The house had been paid for and she had been retired. And she mortgaged the house and set that money aside in an account so that when the 15 years expired, the money would be there for her son to be able to afford the legal proceedings that he needed to try to get out of prison. And then she went back to work. She went and she got a job and she went back to work to make the payments on the mortgage that she took on the house. See, moms won't quit on you. Moms won't give up on you. I was watching a show one time about a documentary about prisons in North Carolina, and I was very interested because we had a prison ministry in the church in Durham, and I was watching this program, and there was a man who was down in Caledonia, which is a prison farm in the eastern part of the state, and he was in for life, and he had been there for 20 or 25 years already. And the person interviewing him said, you know, what's your biggest regret about coming into prison? And he said, well, he says, my biggest regret about coming to prison was not for myself. He said, I did the crime, and I understand that this is my punishment for doing what I did. He says, I can accept that fact. He says, and I understand that after a short while that my wife needed to divorce me so she could move on with her life. I understand that. That's a consequence of my coming here. He says, I can accept that. He said, I understand that after a while my kids stopped writing and they stopped visiting, and they too had to move on with their lives. I mean, he said they can't live their lives tied to coming to see me in prison. He said, I understand that. I accept that. He said, but my greatest regret is that when you come to prison, you take your mother with you. He says, there's not a birthday that goes by that I don't get a birthday card from her. He says, there's not a month that goes by that I don't get a letter from her where she sends a few dollars to have deposited in my account here so that I can buy something at the commissary. And he says, my greatest regret is what I did to my mother, because she never forgot. And the last example is one of a similar vein that just struck me when I heard it in the news. And this was a man in Florida who committed horrendous crimes. He committed multiple murders and torture, and the behavior he engaged in was terrible and horrible, and he was sentenced to death. And before they took him from his cell to carry out the sentence, he was allowed to call home, and he was raised by a stepmother. I don't know why, but he was raised by a stepmother, and he was allowed to call home and talk to his mother or his stepmother one last time. And the last thing she said to him before she hung up the phone was, you'll always be my good little boy. And I read that in the paper, and I was just blown away. You'll always be my good little boy. Here this man had done despicable things that no person in their right mind would look at what he did and say, well, somehow, that was good. These are horrendous acts against humanity that he committed. He was on his way, literally on his way to the electric chair within an hour or so. And his stepmother said to him, you'll always be my good little boy. She would not see the horrible things that he did. She remembered him the way she wanted to remember him, as a good little boy, growing up. So our moms won't quit on us. They'll stay with us. We will always be their child, no matter what. In the good and in the bad, no matter what. They are there for us to put our ribbons on a refrigerator, and the drawings that we bring home from school, and all of the other little things that they do to let us know that you're their special someone. And what we have to recognize is that God's love for us is even more so like that. That too is a symbol, a tangible symbol of the intangible love of God. That which has created us out of itself cannot abandon us, will not abandon us, and will never quit on us, will always be there for us, will always be ready, as in the story of the prodigal son, will always be ready to welcome us home. But we must make the decision to consciously accept it and to embrace it and to experience the unconditional love that is waiting for us. So I invite you this day to contemplate the miracle of motherhood, and the miracle of motherhood as a visible sign of God's unconditional love for each and every one of us. That which has created us out of itself loves us unconditionally. It will not judge us, will not punish us, will not condemn us, because to do so would be to do so to itself. But rather it waits in quiet repose, as the poet tells us, right? See, poetry gets beyond the intellect. Poetry gets into the feeling. And there is that which is waiting within us in quiet repose for us to awaken to its presence, to experience its presence, to unite with its presence. And motherhood is a symbol in our lives of all of that. So this Mother's Day, let's celebrate our own moms. If you are a mom, let's celebrate the wonderful, wonderful act of creation and love that you have participated in and still participate in. But let us remember the great love. Perhaps the greatest love is a better way to say it. The love that has created all of that, given us our mothers as its representative to love us here while we are on this earth, and will always love us and always prepare for us and always care for us, no matter where we go. As we come into this world, loving hands await us to care for us. And as we move to the next, loving hands await us and care for us. So this day we celebrate you, Mom. We celebrate motherhood and moms everywhere, of all times, even the ancient moms, the model for the first little carved stone. We celebrate what motherhood means. We celebrate the miracle of motherhood. And we celebrate the very God, which is the mother of us all. Let's go forward this week in unconditional love, because as we recognize that God's love for us is unconditional, and as we recognize that our mothers and mothers everywhere are just symbols of that unconditional love, then we recognize that we too are those symbols of God's unconditional love. Representatives is a better word than a symbol. We are representatives of God's unconditional love. God loves others by means of me. God loves me by means of others. When I hug you, God is hugging God. When you hug me, God is hugging God. So as we come to a deeper understanding of what this beautiful symbol of motherhood means in our lives, we recognize that we too can go out and be that experience of unconditional love for someone else in this world at this time who just needs a little love. As we start to let that unconditional love flow through us, as we start to give more and more of it, we start to experience more and more of it. And we become that which we have always been seeking, the love of God in action. And so it is.